Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Walker, and I'll go ahead and let my partner introduce herself as well.
Hi again, everyone. My name is Shanda Hamn.
And today, for the ELED 6262, Race in Education and Schooling, we will be engaging in dialogue around the module, but essentially the lesson talking about critical race theory, CRT, and then diving deeper into Native American CRT theory. And so essentially, we want to start by setting the foundation and really diving deep into understanding and defining what critical race theory is and some of those main ideas. And so we both, did the work of kind of defining it for ourselves. But for me, I think the main premise of critical race theory is that racism is not merely an individual basis or prejudice, individual bias, excuse me, or prejudice, but it is deeply embedded within our social systems, institutions, and structures. And so it essentially seeks to analyze how race and racism intersect with other social categories like class, gender, sexuality, to further reinforce systemic inequalities. And I think, when we were reading the module and the resources provided to us, there are a lot of things that stuck out in terms of those key components or main ideas for CRT. And I think one of them that really stuck out was just understanding one, we've been talking about this basically for this whole journey with our master's program, but that race is essentially a social construct and it is not like a biological fact. But I think that's really important that there's a systemic foundation to understanding that everything that we're talking about is not just because it's intentional, and it is systemic. And I think another thing that is a consistent theme is white supremacy. We are having conversations about the invasiveness of whiteness and white supremacy and how it affects our students. So I will get your input. What does CRT mean to you? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Taylor, with everything you said there, especially about the pervasiveness of white supremacy from our country's inception, um, or what we now know as the United States of America. And in thinking about the video posted about the overview of CRT, I like how it said that CRT is a research framework where it allows us to kind of address the disparities, when you're looking at minorities and white people and you see these disparities, right? And these disadvantages. And you begin to ask yourself the question, why? Well, in steps critical race theory. It helps us to kind of connect the dots from things that happened in the past to now and why these things are happening now, why these gaps exist when it comes to education and poverty and that kind of a thing. And so for me, CRT is a framework established to connect the dots. What things were put in place back then that the residue is it still exists today, from those things and those policies that were institutionalized back then. And so, yeah, it's a framework that helps us answer these tough questions.
For sure.
Yeah,
Um,
and so go ahead. Mhm.
No. I think you did an awesome job explaining that. And I'm not going to jump ahead. I was going to be like, you hit it on right there on the nail, those historical components. But before we get there, I'll let you usher us into the perspective from Native Americans and how it affects them.
Yeah, and so thinking about history, I mean, a big part of history is the word story.
Mm.
And so I think stories are significant and experiences are significant. And those stories, help to paint the bigger picture. And like I said, they help to connect the dots. And on one of the websites, it talked about some tenets of critical race theory. And one of the tenets, I'm going to pull it up real quick,
Okay.
um, was about stories. And it says, stories are not separate from theory, they constitute theory and are therefore real and legitimate sources of data and ways of being. And so when we think about Native Americans, we have to know the stories. And, one of the stories that was prevalent was that there was an all-out attack to erase their culture, to strip everything that was attached to who they were as Native Americans in terms of traditions, language, ways of being, to kind of strip that from them. And it was clearly seen and evidence in, the articles that we've read.
And I'll add, like, I know, I'll be honest, I've been very candid in my writing about how I had such a limited understanding of lens
Mm-hmm.
around the Native American experience. And so, like, when we were learning about the boarding schools and the forced relocation and assimilation, like, I knew, but I didn't fully know the depth of the
Mm-hmm.
oppression, essentially. So yes, and that plays such a huge role, right, when we're having this conversation about CRT. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that up. Didn't want to interrupt, but I appreciate
No,
you.
no, that was a valid point. I mean, I was just looking at, because it said in 1879, Captain Richard Henry Pratt, that he kind of led that initiative in creating these boarding schools.
For sure.
And one of the phrases that kind of like just, broke my heart, was kill the Indian and save the man, eradicate the Indian and make the man. So meaning that, we're gonna keep you,
Yeah,
but anything related to your cultural identity, as it relates to being a Native American, we're going to strip that from you. And so we're going to create these schools, and we're going to take your children and basically try to erase,
yeah,
everything that they've known up to this point, and assimilate
yeah,
to everything that to everything that it means to be white, or the white standard, right? And we're
sure.
going to force them, to do things our way.
Yeah, and I know we're talking about Native Americans, but I think we would be remiss not to mention, like, this has been in every group. Like, we were charged
Mm-hmm.
with reading about all the groups. The last 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
you and I have been working it together, and that centering of whiteness, it takes us back. That has been, the incubator, like the eye of the storm, centering
Mm-hmm.
whiteness, and that was the case for Native Americans, but also some of the other demographics that we read about. So thanks for
Yeah.
mentioning
And I thought, one thing I found unique, and I'm kind of glad we chose this people group, because it was mentioned how, in terms of discrimination, it was more cultural for them rather than racial, you
that.
know? So, it talked about Pratt and how, he didn't see, Native Americans
At all. Yeah,
themselves as inferior,
yeah,
but their cultural practices to
yep,
him, were inferior.
right,
Right. They were beneath them. They were other and alternative to what they felt was the standard. And so children had to abandon their clothing, their habits, their appearance, and their language to kind of fit this standard.
for sure, for sure. And I appreciate you mentioning that. So let me ask, why is Native American critical race theory so important? Why do you think that is so important?
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about connecting the dots. And I feel like so many people in America, and I'll say, white Americans, they don't want to, and it's not just white Americans, I shouldn't just say that, but there are a lot of people who don't want to connect the dots.
For sure.
They feel like when things like the Emancipation Proclamation happened, or
Mhm.
the Civil Rights Movement happened, that those key points in history, that it was a blank slate
Yeah,
and everything just kind of resets. And the image that came to mind was like, when you go bowling and you bowl and knock the pins down, then there's a reset. Well, that wasn't the case,
Yeah.
right? There was no blank slate, and there was no reset,
Yeah.
right? No, there are still things happening today, as a result of things that happened back then, and people don't want to connect the dots. So I feel like that's why it's important, is because we have to understand the past. We have to understand these experiences to kind of, have some explanation as to why things are the way they are. They didn't happen in a vacuum,
Yeah.
right? It's not isolated from, external things. No, there are specific things that happen in the lives of real people, right, that are affecting outcomes today, racist outcomes, right? And so we have to ask the questions. We have to understand, why things are the way they are. And so to me, that's why it's important. Do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you hit it again right on the nail. I think one of the things I add when I was doing the reading in the article, Visibly Invisible, one of the things that stood out to me, there were a lot of cases that happened. Let's take Brown versus Board of Education, that
Mm-hmm.
like associates with one struggle, but that was a defining moment for the Native American plight as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in the spectrum of segregation in schools. And so I think you're absolutely right that it is important. Why is it important? One, to just critical race theory in general, but more specifically Native Americans, because these are real people with real stories and real experiences. And I think there has been a disservice around understanding the ways in which racism has affected them. And I think one of the things that in that same article, and don't quote me, but basically was basically saying that there was very limited research available around
Mm-hmm.
Native Americans in reference in the lens of CRT, and then segregation in schools. So like people, I think more people are having the conversation, but for a long time, that conversation wasn't being had about this demographic of people. And I think that might even have to do too, right, with it being not as racial, but cultural, right? They try to separate
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
experiences, but I think that's really important.
Yeah.
I guess the follow-up question, and you did a really good job answering that. I guess that first question, I think a follow-up is, how does CRT help scholars understand the specific school experiences of Native Americans as students? And so like as educators, how does this help our framework around looking at their experiences in the classroom?
Yeah, and I think we, kind of answered this with the last one, but I really feel like, as urban educators, we have to be an advocate for our students, and for especially as it relates to, how we can help other educators, teach our students. And I think a big part of creating educational environments that are safe and welcoming is understanding students and how valuable their identities are.
Mhm.
And I think understanding the past through the lens of CRT helps us understand the struggle,
Yeah.
to fight for their identity, and how we need to create spaces where we welcome their identity,
Right.
and we celebrate their identities, to contrast the time where their identities weren't celebrated and they were forced um, to embrace a different identity that was anything but theirs.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's important for that reason. We have to understand how schooling experiences were, so we can kind of try to undo that damage now, you
Yeah.
know? What about you?
Yeah, I think it's the same. And then that intentionality, I think, and one of the resources provided, I thought it was really cool how it was giving classroom strategies
Mm-hmm.
by that. And I think there were two that really stuck out. Um, it was talking about incorporating cultural conversations in the classroom, being intentional, especially with the Native American population having such strong ties to their culture, and also not assuming, right? And I'm gonna be honest. I hope
Mm-hmm.
it's okay for me to be candid. Black people, right? We kind of have this and it's not standard across the board, but my lived experience is we assume, or we have a cultural tie, right, and religion and culture around religion, where we'll assume or we'll do things that my other people, and when I say not other people, but the othering of people and excluding them from their experiences in their religion.
Mm-hmm.
For me, when I think about that question, to bring us back, it really challenges me to be intentional about those strategies in the classroom, how to be more inclusive, how to be mindful of those stereotypes, and then essentially acknowledging and showing value placed on the different values that other people have,
Yeah.
and being inclusive of those when teaching and when creating inclusive environments.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
and I think this is kind of reminding me of some current events that are within the last year, um, talking about inclusivity, right? We definitely have to do a better job in our schools to helping teachers and students, recognize, you know, things that are different um, doesn't mean they're beneath us or less than. And I feel like some students, have that mentality that when they interact with other people who may have different cultures and traditions, that there's a right and a wrong, and we have to begin to dismantle that. And I'm reminded of a couple of recent events where students wanted to honor their identities and honor their Native American heritage by adorning their graduation caps with eagle feathers, which in their culture and tradition, those are, very important and significant. And so there was a case actually in Arizona where a girl wanted to wear what was called a medicine wheel and an eagle plume on her graduation cap, and she was denied that opportunity. And during the ceremony, they saw another student with this breast cancer awareness sticker on their cap. And then at other ceremonies throughout the district, there were students who had other things attached to their caps. And so, of course, her family, they were disappointed, by that exclusion. And so they filed a lawsuit against the district. And just this year, so this, I want to say this started in 2019, maybe 2019, 2020, but just this year in April 2023, the case was settled in favor, of the girl and her family, and basically said that dress codes cannot target and alienate Native students, nor require them to sacrifice practicing their spiritual beliefs to celebrate their academic achievements. And then you parallel something like that to what's going on in Oklahoma now, where there was a bill put in place to protect students' rights, Native American students' rights to honor their culture in that way, but he vetoed it. And so it was almost unanimously passed, but the governor in Oklahoma actually vetoed that bill. And so, it seems like, we're repeating some of the same things by trying to silence and erase, these students' identities by doing things like this. What are your thoughts on those?
No, I think that is great. I mean, when we were talking prior to our, starting this official discussion, and you were shedding light on some of these cases, it really highlighted to me one of the themes within CRT that was talking basically about sovereignty in law, and basically saying that CRT acknowledges the importance of law in shaping racial dynamics and how it is used yet again, right, to set up these systems that are biased, that are oppressive. And then just historically, when we're looking at Native American tribes, they have a really unique relationship with the legal American legal system, and also a political relationship when it comes to the U.S. government. And so thank you for providing those examples. I think those are key. I think one of the things, and I'm not going to take your thought, when we were brainstorming discussion, you brought up that it's similar to what's happening in Florida.
Yeah, yeah,
Trying
yeah. I mean,
to,
yeah.
yeah. Um,
Absolutely. Yep, you said, I mean, I'm thinking about that, and I'll let you chime in more on the Florida case, but there there was actually another case, and let me see where this was. This was in Montana, where students basically were wanting more representation in education in terms of the history being told, wanting to know more about their specific history. And
Mhm.
so, actually, in 2021, Montana actually became the first and only state to constitutionally mandate the teaching of Indian education in public schools. But since that time, the concern was fidelity, like wanting schools to actually follow through with this. And so now there's a current court case happening to make sure schools are actually teaching all students Native American history, because this would definitely help with being culturally competent, and then also developing empathy. And that kind of goes to back what you're saying, like what's happening now in Florida with the rewriting of the African American history standards. And again, the goal to erase history, and to try to rewrite it or make it be something that it wasn't. And so, we're definitely denying students, the right to know, and the right to learn about themselves. And I know sometimes people feel like there's a fear that white students will feel bad or shamed or guilty, when really is again just building into their cultural competency and developing that empathy that we all need. And so, yeah, thank you for reminding me of that and bring that up. And so you're free to share more thoughts on the case in Florida.
Yeah, I think that is exactly it. And I think we're afraid of the truth. We're
Hmm.
afraid, and I think that's exactly what you're saying. But are us being scared, other people being scared, right, does not give us the right to censor people or to
Yeah.
culturally exterminate them. And that
Hmm.
is essentially what's happening. That is
Hmm.
essentially what is happening within our schools, or just within our community, our country in general. So I
Hmm.
appreciate you sharing that. Well,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we are over time, but we had a great
Yes.
conversation. So we won't apologize for that. We won't apologize for that. But thank you for engaging with me in this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing all that you did. I feel enlightened. I really enjoyed this module. I've enjoyed working with you. But that wraps up our conversation.
Yeah. Good
Um,
job, Taylor. It's been a great working with you too. And I think we elevated each other. So nice work.